Finance Committee of Monday, July 31st, 2023. Ask Dave to please call the roll.
Council President Curry.
Present.
Alder Verveer.
Here.
Alder Vitiver.
Present.
Alder Madison.
Here.
Alder Evers.
Here.
Alder Rummel.
Present.
Mayor, you have quorum.
Thank you. We have no speakers registered for general public comment. So are there any disclosures or recusals on items on today's agenda? Seeing none, we'll go to the consent agenda. We have a closed session item, which obviously will be excluded from consent, as will the budget calendar and process overview. Those are items 8 and 9. Are there other items that alders would like to have excluded from the consent agenda? Going once? Going twice? Nobody wants a presentation on the mid-year? Okay. Alder Verveer.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mayor. I didn't hear you correctly. I thought that would be separated for the presentation that has been prepared. So I would appreciate if we could run through that PowerPoint.
Yep. So that's item 7.
Yes, thank you.
Are there any other requests for exclusion from the consent agenda? If not, could I get a motion on items 2 through 6?
Move to adopt items 2 through 6.
Second.
Moved and seconded to adopt the recommendations on items 2 through 6. Is there any objection to recording unanimous vote? Alder Verveer.
Yeah, the first several need to be re-referred, just as a reminder.
Yeah, so that's we're adopting the recommendations, and note on the first 3 items, the recommendation is to re-refer. All right, so seeing no objection, we will record those votes. That is to re-refer the first 3 items and to adopt the recommendations on items 5 and 6. And we will go to item 7, which is Legistar 78951. Amending the 2023 adopted operating budget for what I will broadly call the mid-year course correction and appropriations. And Christine and Dave, I believe you have a presentation for us.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I sent this presentation out shortly before today's meeting, and we'll run through the slides today. So this presentation has an overview of the 23 projections that we completed based on actual expenditure data through May of this year. We'll have a few agency highlights and then review the content of the mid-year appropriation resolution. This slide presents a summary of the general fund budget. We are in a surplus position where general fund revenues are projected to be about $500,000 over budget, and expenses are projected to be currently a little over 10 million under budget. I would say that this projection, approximately half of the surplus amount is what we set aside for contingent reserve of 1.9 million and compensated absence escrow of 4 million. These funds are budgeted in direct appropriations, a central location that we transfer out to agencies at the end of the year based on what's needed for to cover agency deficits. And then the remaining $4 million or so is underspending within agency budgets, primarily in the form of salary savings due to vacancies. Of the general fund revenues, as I mentioned, the total projection is looking at us being $500,000 over budget. The largest portion of this is from interest revenues that are projecting to be $1.4 million above budget. And we made slight adjustments downward in ambulance conveyance fees and building permit revenues, reducing those revenues by about $300,000 below where we budgeted for the year. In terms of general fund expenses, I would say overall, most of the surpluses you'll see in agency budgets are predominantly from salary savings, reflecting turnover and vacancies. One thing to note is that the personnel budgets are based on a salary projection that we developed pretty early in the budget process. So the budget's really estimating our best estimate of salaries and benefits, and we include step and longevity increases, as well as the GME increases that were adopted as part of the budget, but it's not a perfect reflection of employee actual wages. So there, you may see some large numbers in agencies that are really not that the agency is, it's more of a fine-tuning issue. It's not that the agency is really severely over or under budget. And also some of the projections don't fully account for all of the GME catch-up increases because of when we pulled the data. So some of the straight line projections don't include all of those cost increases. So the next few slides break down the agencies by functional area. So this slide has all of the administration and general government agencies. You have the adopted budget, revised budget, the mid-year projection, and the difference, which shows how much over or under budget an agency is projected to be. The number is in red. That suggests that we're looking at a potential deficit. In the agencies where we're projecting deficits, these tend to be smaller agencies where they have a large comp absence payout due to a retirement, or a double fill where it's a very small agency, so a short-term double fill might throw off their projection. And in terms of agencies projecting surpluses, this is almost entirely due to salary savings and vacancies. Similarly, in the planning and development and public facilities, which is the library fund, some agencies are seeing some underspending in purchase services or supply costs, but this is, again, the surplus amounts are primarily driven by salary savings. And in public works, engineering, streets, parks, similar story where there's underspending due to salary savings. A mild first half of the snow season, we are projecting up to 3 general plows at the end of this year, but across the board are under budget in the public works and transportation agencies. And with public safety, police and fire is projected to be close to their budget amount. Permanent salaries are anticipated to be under budget. Fire is currently at about 29 vacancies with another potential retirement, and are projecting about 20 graduates in a recruit class in November, and to have 2 additional classes in 2024 to eliminate the staffing deficit. But that creates savings in permanent wages. Part of that is offset by higher than budgeted overtime. And they have about $1 million that they're anticipating in sick leave payout. But they also have some underspending in their non-personnel items. And at the end of the day, we're projecting them to be close to their budget level. Police is projected to be under budget by about $670,000. Similarly, they have they're expected to be under budget in permanent wages, partly offset by increases in overtime. And they are expected to be able to absorb their sick leave payouts. An independent monitor is a very small office. They are in one of their positions has been hired, and a second is anticipated to start later this year. And that's primarily their surplus is primarily due to salary savings. Within the non-general fund agencies, a few highlights. Fleet is projecting a surplus in supplies due to lower than budgeted fuel costs. We budgeted fuel at some of the highest prices last year, so that's an area where we expect to see some savings. Their purchase service expenses are higher than budget due to vehicle repair and maintenance costs. So the resolution does transfer some funding between supplies and purchase services. Golf is having another good year with a projection of $350,000 more in revenues than anticipated, and they'll be the resolution includes a request to increase expenses to reflect those additional revenues. Metro is projected to utilize the full amount of federal recovery funds of $22.4 million. Parking utility, the charge revenues are under budget, but that's offset by higher than budgeted permit revenues, and they're not anticipating to need fund balance that was included in their budget. Public health is projecting revenues to be over budget by about $800,000 due to the timing of the receipt of a FEMA COVID grant. They are seeing some significant salary savings. Personnel is projected under budget by more than $2 million, with the department currently having 20 vacancies. Similar to the notes on police and fire, there is an offset in increased overtime and hourly wages, but it's a net savings for the agency. And the sewer is projecting slightly higher than budgeted revenues due to a rate increase. The streets resource recovery special charge, which is a restricted fund, is projecting expenses to be under budget due to salary savings, and lower than processing fees, which are part of their purchase services expenses, are lower than budget due to a favorable contract with Pelletary. And water is projecting revenues to be a little more than $6 million over budget due to the rate increase going into effect earlier this year. So that takes us to the contents of the mid-year resolution. The first section of the resolution addresses carry forward encumbrances. If an encumbrance is outstanding at the end of the year, it can be carried forward if it reflects a service or contract that spans multiple years. And we include a budget for carry forward encumbrances in direct appropriations that we transfer out to agencies to cover those expenses. So in the general library fund, there were a little over $330,000 in carry forward encumbrances. We budgeted $233,000 in direct appropriations, so the remainder would need to be transferred from the general fund balance and the library fund balance. And public health had a carry forward encumbrance of $410,000 that is proposed to be covered by public health fund balance. There were some unbudgeted expenses in the 23 adopted budget that the resolution proposes covering through general fund balance. The first item is occupancy of the town hall facility. This wasn't included in the 23 budget due to the timing, and occupants were not known at the time the budget was adopted. So the resolution increases the budget authority in the engineering division for maintenance. It increases total expenses by $84,000, and there's a series of increases to interdepartmental billings and charges to offset the expenses, with a total general fund impact of about $42,000. Also within the engineering division, they previously paid for a software license in the capital budget, but to be compliant with general accounting standards, Ford we need to move that cost into the operating budget, which totals $113,000. So between the carry forward appropriations, Town of Madison costs, and the shift of software costs, there's a transfer of $252,000 from general library fund balance to 2023. And we would still qualify for the expenditure restraint payment because the capacity under ERP is a little over $14 million. The second part of the resolution addresses intra-agency transfers within the general fund. There's a proposal to transfer $200,000 from salaries to purchase services, partly to cover the cost of a railroad study and also to account for higher than budgeted electricity costs that are hitting traffic engineering particularly hard, and a transfer of $31,000 from salaries to supplies in the transportation division to cover some furnishings for the MMB offices, as well as transferring to purchase services for some consulting services. And in the grant fund, transferring $161,000 across different majors and across different revenue majors, again, to reflect the timing of when a grant was received. Within the other non-general fund agencies, there are some increases in revenues and expenses. CDA Housing has an increase in federal revenues by $2.2 million for the housing assistance payments, and increases purchase services and uses fund balance, increases the use of fund balance and purchase services for the Triangle Master Plan. Within CDA redevelopment, there's an increase of fund balance applied in purchase services for the MRCDC building improvements. Golf the resolution would increase revenues from charges for service and expenses for salary, supplies, and purchase services. And in fleet, there is a proposed transfer between supplies and purchase service to cover maintenance and repair costs. There's, in terms of amendments to the capital budget, there is a section related to arbitrage. That's more of a technical adjustment to the budget that is part of the resolution that we have each year. As part of the borrowing exercise, agencies review their capital projects to determine how much borrowing proceeds are needed for specific projects. And if they're not going to fully spend down their authorized budget, we may have to swap which proceeds are applied to a project so that we comply with arbitrage. So this doesn't change the authorized borrowing for any project. It just changes which year of proceeds are applied to specific capital items. And there's also a separate attachment in the resolution that shows this table in a larger, more readable format. There's also some transfers within the water utility. These are all net neutral transfers that adjust the budget authority across various major projects and programs. And this is really a correction to reflect updated scopes of work based on what water utility knows now about the total cost of certain projects in 2023. And these transfers don't increase the utility's debt. It's just moving money across various majors. And the final item is a transfer within the capital budget to correct the amount of TIF funding applied to the CDD Affordable Housing Program. The adopted budget had $7 million in TIF proceeds, but the actual amount is a little over $6 million. So the resolution would lower the TIF amount to what's available and add GO borrowing to maintain the total level of funding of $10 million for the program. So those are all of the slides, and we are happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Christine. Are there questions? Alder Evers.
Thank you, Mayor. And this is just a broader question that perhaps you or Dave can address, or maybe even the mayor can help us understand. I've been reading articles in national publications about municipalities and the public sector in general struggling with hiring and retention of employees. Is this something that is continuing to impact in terms of potential budget savings, but nonetheless a big challenge for us as a city in terms of staffing and finding employees moving on to the private sector because they've raised their rates, and due to budget constraints, we're not able to increase the pay for our employees. Is that a factor? I know that doesn't really directly have bearing on your presentation, but I do have questions about that.
Yeah, Alder, I think a conversation at a separate time with Ms. Hilson, our director of HR, might be illuminating. But the short version is, yes, we continue to have turnover and face, I think, the same challenges that any employer faces right now with recruitment and retention. I don't think there is a pattern of who folks are leaving for. Some of them are leaving for other public sector jobs. Some of them are leaving for private sector jobs. I think for a variety of reasons. But in this context, I think the sort of relevant impact is both that, yes, we are realizing more salary savings than perhaps we used to. Although I think that seems to be leveling off, and Dave and Christine might have an opinion about that. But there is, of course, the cost of recruitment and training, which is not insignificant. So it is something that we are very much focused on, and
overtime too.
Yes, yes, exactly. And so definitely something that HR is looking very carefully at and working on. And I think you will see more coming forward soon, focused on retention of existing staff, but also improving our recruitment efforts for open positions. Dave or Christine, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think you summarized it well, Mayor. We are, I think, continuing to see turnover in a number of different agencies and classifications. I'll just remind you that the 2023 budget includes funding for a compensation study, and that RFP just went out. I think one element of that will be, are we well positioned in terms of how we classify positions and so on with recruitment and retention issues for the long term? So I think there's something there. I also just want to highlight that, as Christine said at the outset, more than half of this projected savings is the contingent reserve and the compensated absence escrow. So now some of that is clearly driven by turnover, but it's also just a matter of, are we facing a lot of risks in certain areas, and like snow removal and so on, which we're not quite seeing as much, at least so far this year. So that's a couple perspectives.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks.
Alder Verveer?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Christine, for the presentation. I appreciate that. Projections are overly positive, so that's great to hear and see. I do have a couple of specific questions. So speaking of employee compensation, you noted that the projections do not include the general municipal employees catch-up pay increase that's occurred this summer. Do you estimate that will have much of an impact on these projections moving forward?
It was incorporated in some, but not all of the data. I think that with the level that we're projecting salary savings, that we would expect that agencies could absorb that amount.
Thank you. And then as it relates to a couple of specific agencies of interest, of course, fire has been a focus of our conversations here at the Finance Committee for many years, given their overtime line item being over budget year after year, and the issues that they're having with their personnel in that regard and keeping the minimum staffing. I'm curious if you can remember, or Betsy or Dave, when you said in your presentation, Christine, that the current level of absences is about 10 per day. How has that been compared to the last couple of years?
10 per day is a little bit higher than it has been. It had been running about 8. I think right now it's at 9.6, rounded up to 10, but it is a little higher than it has been.
And I know Christine, thank you, Betsy. And I know Christine mentioned it. Can you be more specific, Betsy or Christine, about the academy timing and how soon that will help us with this issue?
So they currently have an academy going on now, and they anticipate 20 to 24 graduates in November. So that will definitely help. But they've had higher turnover this year, so they're still be in a deficit position at the end of 2023. Their budget request for 2024 includes 2 academies, and they are projecting that with those academies, they should end 2024 at full staff.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. And then the last agency, Mayor, I was curious about is the parking utility. And obviously heard in the presentation that on one end, things are still trending negatively, but on the other hand, permits are positive in terms of revenue, and they won't need to dip into the reserves. Is a projection for now. So my question is does the PU, and I guess Stephanie in particular, based on what she's reported to you, Christine and Ryan, believe that this trend will continue, where the charge revenues will continue to be trending negatively, but yet the permit revenues are more than making up for that in terms of the revenue projections?
I'll just add to that. So the long-term projections with the State Street garage reconstruction, those are going to have an impact from that. So kind of the long-term forecast is that those will continue to be down, but mostly because of that construction. Because of taking all those hundreds of spaces offline. That makes perfect sense. Beyond that, one thing that occurred to me when I saw the PowerPoint was I was impressed that the permit revenues are up. Are those all leases? Do you recall, Ryan, or is it across the board that we're doing better in permit revenue? And I presume that's taking State Street campus offline, at least the Lake Street side of it won't have a big impact on that one way or the other. I don't have that level of detail, but that's something we can follow up with Stephanie to get a better handle. But you're confident in your conversations with Stephanie and others that they won't need to dip into the reserves this year? It doesn't appear that way. And some of that's on the cost end too. They've had some salary savings like other people, and some areas too where they've seen, one thing with the revenues being down is there's less credit card transaction fees and things like that we save money on demand too. So there's kind of things happening on both ends. But right now the projections are pretty good that they don't need to dip into the reserves this year. But again, going forward, they may have to with some of the big projects coming down the road. Good. I appreciate that. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Alder Rummel.
Thank you, Mayor. I have 2 questions. The first one is just a clarification. There was a mandated railroad study, and I just wanted to make sure I understood. Is that just this interstate rail that we're all hoping for, or something else?
Ryan, can you speak to that? I think
It's not about Amtrak.
Okay.
I don't think.
No, was that the move for TE? I'm sorry, I missed the question. Was that for the move to TE for the?
Yeah.
That's a state mandated study. I think it's for the signals at railroad crossings. They have some sort of reporting they have to do annually, starting this year, actually, and going forward. That they'll have to do every year, but I don't think it's Amtrak, just railroad crossings in general.
Well, it sounds like it's quiet zones, which makes me happier than I think even Amtrak does.
I don't think it's quiet zones, Alder.
Oh, okay. What is it? I don't get it.
We have a number of different railroad crossings throughout the city. All of them have signals. It sounds to me like it is a compliance study for those crossings. That is a new mandate from the state.
Got it. Thank you. My second question, I just was, there was the Affordable Housing Fund was budgeted at 7 million and there's a shortfall and we're proposing to make it up. Does that happen before? I guess I don't recall that ever seeing that we're borrowing to make up for TIF and our budget, or did I understand the presentation correctly?
So, Alderman, that's basically an error that we're correcting from the budget. So we had made an estimate of which TIDs would have an affordable housing year. And then that increment is deposited in the affordable housing fund and used for affordable housing. And we show that in the capital budget and capital improvement plan. And so when we made the estimate for the 2023 capital budget, we had just made an error and we're just correcting that error to make, to keep it at that top line number of 10 million total. So the mix just needs to be changed between GO and that extra year of TIF increment.
So are we generally borrowing for things that we're short, just to get the big picture?
Well, again, it's short, and it's more of a technical adjustment that would have been in the budget before you for 2023. It's just that we discovered an error, and we're now making sure that we're truing that up. And in some instances, yes, we do make those sorts of corrections.
Maybe the missing piece of information here is that in general, the Affordable Housing Fund is made up of proceeds from TIF and borrowing.
Yep.
So every year there is some proceeds from TIF and some from general borrowing. And they just put the line in the wrong place this year, and we're adjusting it.
Thank you, Mayor. That helps.
President Curry?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Dave, Christine, Betsy, and whoever else is responsible for doing this. I surely couldn't, and I feel a little silly asking this question, but in terms of what Finance Committee and the Council's role is in approving any budget amendments, like I'm familiar with that process. The mid-year appropriations, and you can tell me it's appropriate to take it offline too, but what is the process? Like, how do you all get alerted of these projections when you get the certain projections, whether that's salary savings, whether that's under budgeted for something else? Like, what process is in place to figure out, okay, this goes to the general fund, this can be reabsorbed, or this can be transferred within agencies? Can you help me understand a little bit more about the process?
Sure. Thanks for that question. So the projection process takes myself and the budget analyst team about 2 months to complete. We pull data for all of the city agencies and funds. We send that out to the agencies. A lot of times they'll have a much better sense of what work they have planned for the rest of the year, the timing of certain obligations and different contracts. And then we sit down and meet with everyone at least once, sometime between June and July, and they'll tell us what they have coming online. We might do a straight line projection that says if you continue to spend your payroll at the current rate, this is where you'll end up. And so we have at least one meeting with everybody to determine where we think they'll end up. And then the projection that we present to you all is a combination of our best estimates plus input from the agencies. Those meetings are also a time where they'll identify key issues, areas where they think they might have a deficit or that they need to shift funding so that they don't hit a budget stop before the end of the year. So we work with all the agency staff to come up with what's presented in the resolution, and then we'll do that process all over again in October, November for the year-end appropriation.
Thank you. Just a follow-up question for clarity. I think I know the answer. Knowing, for instance, we're heading into budget deliberations and our structural deficit has been a concern for a long time and will continue. I don't know how to ask this. Obviously, we're preempted by the state or directed by the state, but I'm assuming at every opportunity we could have to avoid incurring further debt is taken in consideration in the process, et cetera, or like creative solutions. I'm not sure if I'm making sense there, but probably not. I'll withdraw that.
No, you're right, Alder. So every year we authorize more borrowing than we actually do. And part of the reason for that is finance keeps really careful track of what we actually must borrow for, as opposed to just what we said we were going to. So they do very closely track what we need to actually borrow for. And when you look at, and finance could show these numbers if you're interested in the specifics. If you look at year over year, what the capital budget said we were going to borrow for and what we actually borrowed for, it's significantly lower. So there's definitely an effort there. I think the other thing to note is that all of this work that they do on both the mid-year and the end of year, truing up between projections and actuals, that actually does then inform the next year's operating budget. I mean, we learn things in this process that we don't let go to waste, right? We move that information and learning forward. Christine's nodding, so I think I'm accurate.
Yeah, I think that a good example is in the 24 operating budget, we increased the overall salary savings to 3%. We've historically budgeted at 2%, and we've just looking at the past year trends and similar to what we presented today, that we know that agencies are experiencing high salary savings, and it might not be that level every year, but we felt comfortable making that decision for the 24 budget as part of one of the moves to balance the budget.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Haley?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Christy and Dave. My question is, there has been a lot of concerns about the increase of water utility bill. And here we have 6.27 million higher than the budget due to increase of the budget increase for the bill, water utility bill increase. Can you explain, how that happened and where that will lead us?
So some of that is timing, Alder Wahalia. We did not know what the increase would be because the water utility was still engaged with the PSC in the rate setting process. So the budget's set at a certain level. We already have plans for how that rate increase will be used, and it really is necessary based on what water utility submitted to PSC and PSC's review of everything that the water utility does, its capital plan, and so on. So while it shows that compared to budget, it's 6.2 million higher, but most of that is timing. And when you look out over, the next couple of years, that rate increase will help fund their capital program in particular, as well as their efforts to reduce the amount of debt that needs to be issued for their capital projects, which had reached a very high level up until the last couple years. So I hope that helps. We always have a timing issue at times when there is a rate case before the PSC.
So this is effective from March 23 to the end of the year, or that's from the year beginning of the year to March 2023? Just like when you say effective March 2023, does that mean from March towards the end of the year, or how is the year ended?
The rate increase is ongoing, and it is governed by the Public Service Commission. I think what Dave is saying is that the difference is that when we were putting together the 23 budget, we didn't know what rate increases the Public Service Commission would approve.
Okay.
So we had projected numbers, and they were slightly different from what the PSC actually did approve. And that's why we have a true up at this point in time.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions on the mid-year? If not, can I get a motion, please?
Move to adopt the 2023 operating and capital budget transfers.
Second. There's moved and seconded to adopt. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, is there any objection to recording unanimous vote in favor? Seeing no objection, we'll record a unanimous vote in favor of item 7. That will take us to item 8, which is our 2024, because it's always budget season around here, our 2024 budget calendar and process overview. Christine, I assume this is you again.
Yep. So this will be a pretty brief presentation. I've shared with this committee previously the 24 budget calendar. We are getting to the heart of budget season, so I wanted to remind everyone of the upcoming dates and how we'll be engaging with the Finance Committee and Common Council moving forward. So we'll go through key dates, talk a little bit about the amendment process, and how we'll work with both Finance Committee and Common Council. So here we have the major dates for the capital and operating budget. In this middle column, the capital budget started all the way in March. Agency requests have been available online since the end of April. We have a period of briefings with the mayor's office and decision meetings, and my team is currently about to start the process of putting together the executive book, which will be released on Tuesday, September 5th. As soon as after that's released, there are 2 days of hearings with the Finance Committee. The first meeting on September 11th will start with regular business, and then we'll go into capital briefings. And then the meeting on the 12th is a continuation of the briefings with no regular business. The committee earlier this year decided to have the deliberation and decision meetings in person as a hybrid meeting. So after we have the briefings, alders in the committee will have an opportunity to amend the budget, and then we'll have a decision meeting on September 26th. Again, that will start with regular business, and then the committee will be voting on amendments to the capital budget. On the operating side, we kicked off the process on June 20th, and agencies submitted their requests on July 21st. We have been hard at work processing all of those requests and are really close to getting those posted online. We expect them to be available by this Wednesday, and I'll email all alders as soon as those are posted. In the next few weeks, agencies will be presenting their budget to the mayor's office. We'll have a series of decision meetings, and then throughout the month of September, our team will be putting together the executive operating budget that gets released on October 3rd. There's a similar format for the Finance Committee meetings and amendment meetings. There are 2 nights of deliberations that are going to be virtual, where all agencies will present to you what's included in their executive budget. You all will have an opportunity to propose amendments, and then there will be a meeting where we deliberate and vote on those amendments on October 23rd. Then the full council will have about almost 2 weeks to develop amendments to either the capital or operating budget, and we'll have up to 3 meetings with the full Common Council to adopt amendments and adopt the budget. Zooming in a little closer on just the period of briefings and amendments. As I mentioned, the budget gets introduced at a council meeting, and then the following finance committee meetings are 2 nights where all the agencies that have a budget will present to the finance committee on what's included. And then the committee will have about a week to submit an amendment. So you can submit an amendment at any time after the executive budget is introduced. We typically suggest you wait until you have the opportunity to engage in discussion as part of the briefings. But as soon as the briefings are over, you can start submitting your amendment ideas to us. We do ask that you submit all of your amendments. We have deadlines for the capital and operating budget. That's the Wednesday before we post the amendments online. So we ask that you have everything to us by Wednesday. That gives us 2 days to process the information, write fiscal notes, etc. And we post it by the Friday before the meeting where you all will vote on it. In terms of the vote meetings, the capital meeting is on a Tuesday due to holiday schedule, and operating will be on a Monday, October 23rd. And then similarly on the Common Council amendments, we have a Wednesday deadline for you all to get your amendments to us, and we publish on Friday before we deliberate the next week. So in terms of how you all as members of the Finance Committee or as members of the Common Council can get involved, I think one of the first steps is really reviewing the agency proposals and understanding what is included in both the agency request and what ultimately makes it into the executive budget. The mayor always reaches out to alders to provide input on priorities for the budget, and that I think will happen later in this process. You're welcome to reach out to myself or finance staff with any questions on the budget. We'll be having some more formal office hours, but send me an email at any time, and I'll do my best to get back to you as quickly as possible. We do encourage all alders to participate in the briefings with Finance Committee, not just Finance Committee members. That way you can ask questions and engage in the discussion in real time. And you can participate in the amendment process either during Finance Committee or Common Council. If you are thinking about submitting an amendment, we always recommend, engaging agency staff who might be impacted, understand what their work plans are and how your ideas fit into what they are already working on or the timeline of certain projects. If you're reaching out to staff, please copy us just so we know what might be coming down the pipeline. It makes it a little easier to draft the fiscal notes and amendments at the very end. We really encourage you, or would really like everyone to follow the deadlines and the Wednesday deadlines I mentioned earlier, just to give us time to be able to process everything and publish amendments far enough in advance so you can all have as much information as possible before the deliberation meetings. Even if you don't have a fully developed idea, just reaching out to let us know that you're thinking about something really helps us stay on top of all of the processes. And just a few notes about sponsorship. So any alder can submit a Finance Committee amendment. If you are not a Finance Committee member, you do need to have a Finance Committee sponsor. And I think historically, the council president has been asked to be a courtesy sponsor for non-Finance Committee members. We do ask that for amendments that have multiple sponsors, we do try to verify by email or phone communication that everyone sponsors the same version of the amendment. So we may be reaching out to you to just make sure that we have the right people on the right versions of different amendments. And if you plan on introducing an amendment for Common Council in November, you do need to have 2 sponsors. And then The operating requests are not available, but I'm going to do a quick screen share of what you can expect to see in the operating request. There are 4 main components. The first is a summary page that shows the budget by fund, service, and major revenue and expenditure category. You'll have the transmittal memo, which is written by the agency director to the mayor that summarizes major changes. There's a data summary that's a printout of an Excel file that compares the cost to continue budget to request. And then there's a service proposal form that describes the changes per service. And for example, the finance department has 6 services. You'll have 1 form per service. So I'm going to really quickly share just so you know what to look for once it's available. So this is the finance department's request. Again, the first page is a 1-page table that will show the budget by fund, by service. You'll see accounting and administrative support, budget, internal audit, risk, and treasury. So you'll see the totals by service. If the agency has agency revenues, you'll see a breakdown, and you'll see a breakdown of expenses broken down by major categories, so salary, benefits, supplies, etc. The next few pages will be the transmittal memo. So this was written by Dave, addressed to the mayor, that outlines the agency's goals and major changes and how we plan to meet our 99% budget target. And then there will be the service change form. That's the data summary that will compare the agency's cost to continue budget to their request and show any major changes. And then this will, for most agencies, will be 1 or 2 pages. Ours is a little long because we include the workers' comp and insurance fund, so it might be a little bit longer for some agencies. And then you'll see a service proposal form per service. So these are listed in alphabetical order. For finance, we start with accounting. And then there are a series of questions like whether or not there are changes to the service description, activities, whether there are significant changes of reallocations. In terms of the finance budget, we pretty much submitted a cost to continue budget. So most of these fields are blank because we're not making any major moves across expenditure categories. So you might see lots of blanks, and that's okay. That just means people are mostly sticking to a cost to continue budget. You'll see a section for supplemental requests and a section for personnel changes if they have allocation changes or reclassifications. And you'll see if they do have a personnel change, there will be a section where they can explain why they are proposing the change. And these service proposal changes are probably about 4 pages per service. So that is what you'll find online later this week. And then just in terms of some resources that are currently available, we really, again, suggest looking at what the agency included in their requests. I had the link to the capital budget, and we'll send the operating budget directly to all the alders once that's available. Another good resource is looking at the 23 adopted budget that includes a breakdown of the services by each agency, as well as a description of the activities performed. And we also have budget highlights for each agency. You don't have to read all 700 pages, but everyone has at least a 1 or 2 page summary that I think is a really good resource. And it's also a good time to revisit the Alder onboarding videos where agencies talk about their, give an overview of what they do and what's in their budget, kind of just to familiarize yourself with what everyone does. I also have links to the kickoff documents that lay out the mayor's guidance to agencies on their capital and operating budgets. And please reach out to me or any member of the budget team with any questions. And finally, we are starting to plan for informational public webinars in mid-October after the operating budget is released. In the past, these have been co-sponsored by alders who've helped with communications and outreaching to their constituents. So I'd welcome any ideas from alders about how to partner to provide information and engage your residents on the budget process. And you can reach out to me on that as well. And that's all.
Thank you, Christine. So let me just add that once the agency requests are posted and you all have had a chance to go through them, you should feel free to let me know your thoughts, things that you support, maybe don't support, ideas, etc. Anytime after they come out, it's useful for me to hear that. And then I think I have meetings scheduled with many of you during the sort of time in which we're receiving the briefings and then making decisions about the executive operating. And so we can talk about them. But if you want to make a time specifically to talk about the budget, feel free to reach out to Nicole and we can set up a specific time to chat. But I'm very much interested in hearing, certainly from finance committee members, but from anyone on the council, what your thoughts are on what should go into the budget. Are there questions for Christine about any of what she just presented? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Christine. Appreciate it. Our next item is our last item, and it is a closed session item. So, President Curry, would you read the notice and make the motion, please?
If I can find my unmute button, wow. When the Finance Committee considers the following matter, it may go into closed session pursuant to 19.85 subsection 1E with statutes, which reads as follows. Deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business, whether competitive bargaining reasons require a closed session. If the Finance Committee does go into closed session, notice is hereby given pursuant to section 19.85 subsection 2 of the Wisconsin State Statutes that it may reconvene in open session without waiting 12 hours as specified in the statute. And I would then move to take us into closed session.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. This is a roll call vote. All those in favor, aye. Those opposed, no, as your name is called. And Dave will please call the roll.
Council President Curry,
Aye.
Alder Revere,
Aye.
Alder Vitever,
Aye.
Alder Madison,
Aye.
Alder Evers,
Aye.
Alder Rummel.
Aye.
Mayor, that's unanimous.
Thank you. All right. So we're going to move into closed session. Alders are welcome to stay, whether or not you are on the Finance Committee.
Recording stopped.
And the relevant staff should stay with us. Everyone else should please exit the Zoom. And we will stand informal for a moment while we go through the process of closing the Zoom and getting off the air. Jesse will let us know. We'll stand informal until we are.
Yep, we are back streaming.
All right, thank you. So the Finance Committee has come back out of closed session. The item we discussed was a request to refinance increment guarantee payments on a TIF loan to 25 West Main Parking LLC. The Finance Committee discussed the request and offered guidance to staff in future negotiations. And that is the end of item 9 and also the last thing on our agenda. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
We'll have President Curry moving and Alder Evers seconding the motion to adjourn. Is there any objection to recording unanimous vote in favor? Seeing no objection, we are adjourned. Thank you all. Have a good evening.